Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be going over the top 10 decks in the Stellar Crown format. We have just started to have City Leagues coming back and online tournaments are starting to happen for us on PTCG Live as the set has just been dropped. So I'm going to be going over some really good starting point lists for everyone based on those Japanese tournament results and my own playtesting. I've been playing in paper for a few weeks now of the Stellar Crown stuff, and I like to think I have a decent idea of what the best builds are going to look like of the popular decks that we have in the format. So this is how the format's shaping up in literally just the first weekend of City Leagues over in Japan. Now you can see that there's a crossed out Ceruledge there because they actually have a number of cards from what will be our Surging Sparks expansion over in Japan, and those are legal for play in their tournaments actually. But fortunately, that little like half set that's in Japan right now doesn't have too many impactful cards. In fact, Ceruledge is probably the most impactful like attacking Pokemon, then it's just some like ace specs that could come into archetypes. So it's quite fortunate that we actually can look at this data, and it carries still a decent amount of weight for our own tournaments coming very soon, where the 3 S tier archetypes in terms of championship points earned, if we equated the top 8 breakdown of all of the decks in these City Leagues to League Cup data, this is where the points would end up, where we have Raging Bolt, Charizard, and Dragapult archetypes in that S tier. The Gardevoir and Lugia's basically unchanged, but they're still in A tier. Then we have Turbo Roaring Moon, Snorlax, Palkia, Regidrago VSTAR, and Miraidon as the other decks that we're going to talk about today. And notably, you won't see any Terapagos just yet in the City League data. It hasn't done that well in its own archetype. It's really only paired alongside Palkia as a bit part player in the most part. So I'm also going to have a discussion around Terapagos and what my favourite builds are for those lists as well, because it hasn't really hit the ground running over in Japan. Let's start with Raging Bolt EX. It's the most point earning archetype out in Japan right now in the first week or so of tournaments, and it's quite possible that Raging Bolt only changes one card in the deck list, and that's incorporating the new Briar supporter card, and this helps Raging Bolt fight into certainly the Charizard matchup. That's the big one here, where now Raging Bolt is comfortable taking a single prize KO with its first Bellowing Thunder, knowing that later on in the game you can Briar for 3 prizes into a Charizard quite comfortably. So it makes Charizard play quite differently. It means that them weaving in Radiant Charizard is also a lot weaker as well, because you could Briar and still attack with an Ogerpon and take 2 prizes in that regard. So it allows Raging Bolt to just keep pushing that prize race more and more advantageously, and Briar's been showing up in over half of the successful Raging Bolts, so it's definitely a worthy include if you feel like there's going to be a lot of Charizard in the format. The other thing worth exploring in Raging Bolt is a bit of a shift of engine, actually, in incorporating a mini package of Noctowl to have that dual searching ability. We know that Noctowl is just a very powerful engine. It can guarantee some critical cards. We know how important finding Prime Catcher is in the deck, as well as chaining those Sardas. And Noctowl allows you to work with guarantees rather than just cycle and dig, which we currently just have from, Greninja, Sada itself drawing cards, Trekking Shoes and Pokestops, that sort of thing. You can warp the list to then have Area 0 Underdepths in the deck instead. You already have Ogerpon as your Terrestrial Pokemon, which naturally fits in, and then you can have Noctowl as a way to just cherry pick these cards out of the deck as you go, and possibly even just some additional upside of Glass Trumpet attaching to your colorless Pokemon to add towards big Bellowing Thunders as well when you're up against some tankier matchups. The first list I'm going to show is very vanilla, very streamlined. It's basically a list that you could be playing today, outside of the fact that there's a Briar been shoved into the 60, because like I said, it has such great upside with Teal Mask Ogerpon being a potential finisher in the deck, either on some single prize card Pokemon for 2 prizes thanks to the Briar, or specifically against Charizard to take a 3 prize swing. It's an absolutely devastating combo. And then pushing the boat out a little bit more is incorporating the Area 0 Underdepths and then a mini colorless package within the deck. You do have to make some concessions here. You don't play the Pokegears, so you do lose out on a little bit of raw consistency for a turn 1 attack going first, because you just have less reach towards the Sada. But that mid game is just so much more streamlined when you have that Noctowl available. And the general core of the list is still pretty much untouched. Next up we have Charizard then. This also is benefiting from the Briar supporter card. Charizard, of course, being a Terra Pokemon itself, will take full advantage of the supporter card. As we know, Burning Darkness gets stronger the more prize cards the opponent has taken. So if they have taken 4 prize cards, we can now Burning Darkness for 300, and ideally we're taking 3 prizes with that attack. It's a great way for us to make big comeback plays. And as we know, Charizard is capable of having the Dusknoir line in the list as well, to try and force the opponent to take a prize card to allow this Briar to kick into effect. So it is very possible for Charizard decks to actually win in 2 attacks by taking a 2 prize KO with Charizard, then using Dusknoir to take a single prize KO and Briaring for 3 prizes as well. The other card that you could explore in Charizard is going to be the Great Tree Stadium card. This could just help you get that Dusknoir line much more capably into play, as well as getting your Pidgeot line into play as well if you just high roll into the Great Tree early and incorporate Pidgeotto into your list. It's really a bit of a strange A-spec compared to the other options of like Prime Catcher or Unfair Stamp in the deck list, which has that easy accessibility via Arven. The Great Tree doesn't really have that. You kind of need to already have Pidgeot in play or naturally draw the Great Tree for it to be a really impactful play in the early game, but it can allow you to carve out those Dusknoir plays, which is still a big backbone of this list. For the list that I've been exploring with, it's just the Briar. I'm sticking with the Unfair Stamp. I still think this is the most inherently powerful A-spec this deck could be playing, but again, the Briar seems like such a great inclusion for the Charizard to make your prize maps a little bit smoother. In at number 3, pole vaulting up the tier list is Dragapult EX. This feels like a massive set for Dragapult. As we know, the Phantom Dive's a really powerful attack. It's mostly been thrown into the discard pile for Regidrago to use though, but now we have the tool card, the Sparkling Crystal A-spec, which allows Dragapult to have a much more consistent turn 2 attack, which is really changing the fortunes of this archetype and making it worth building around. You can also partly thank Crispin in here as well. It's a bit of an upgrade to the Mela supporter that was previously seen in Dragapult Pidgeot lists for a little bit of additional energy acceleration. I think those are the sort of core inclusions, but there are some other really interesting twists going on with Dragapult as of late. The Gravity Stone's a really interesting tool card that can come into Dragapult as well, with counter catchers, with League Headquarters, which is becoming much more common in recent Dragapult lists. Plus this tool card as well. Sure, your first Dragapult might require Sparkling Crystal, but the second one might be able to Gravity Stone. And if you're combining Counter Catcher, Iono, and this Stone tool card, as well as Leak HQ, you can actually Stone Wall certain archetypes like Raging Bolt, making them have monster combos out of low hand sizes. And that Gravity Stone is just an extra piece of the puzzle to try and trap something, allow you to set up damage with that Phantom Dive, have a turn of reprieve, and then suddenly you can be gusting again the following turn and having, 4 or 6 prize card swings in the best case scenario. The other consideration is Briar. Now, I don't think it's necessarily guaranteed to come into the Dragapult deck. It doesn't have the same synergy as Charizard, where in the late game you're naturally KOing everything in your sight. You may have had to prepare the board a lot more throughout the game in order to utilize a Briar to take multiple prizes with the Phantom Dive. Of course, it's only the active Pokemon that is giving up additional prizes here, but you're still at the end of the day a terrestrial attacking archetype, so it could be a way for you to cheese out some extra prizes. As for right now, you're certainly playing the new A-spec card. I am making the inclusion of the Gravity Stone as well as the Crispin in here, and as you can see, I'm playing the League Headquarters, the 3 copies of Countercatcher and Radiant Alakazam. This is kind of a mentality shift around how to defeat some matchups. For example, in the past, you would have Radiant Charizard in the deck list. You try and use this card into some of the aggressive Racing 2 prizing archetypes, but now we're going for that different approach with the Gravity Stone, with the Headquarters, with the Countercatchers. We're trying to buy turns into the engine benched Pokemon, the Pheasantippities from your opponent, or, benched Ogerpon, these sorts of things. You can try and bring those up, make it difficult for your opponent to actually get a follower-up attack once you've used that Iono as well. So you can see elevated counts of that card as well in the list. Going into the A tier then, and we have Gardevoir EX. This deck may not be changed at all. Like, you could play the Gravity Stone, similar to how I've just mentioned Dragapult utilizes it. It's just an extra hurdle you can throw at the opponents. When you have this tool card, you have Iono, you have Countercatcher, and some great spreading attackers in Gardevoir already. Buying that free turn, getting an extra Monkey Dory usage, this, that, and the other, extra draws from Curlier is so valuable, and you're already playing a very heavy Arven package. This might be worth the inclusion right now. Something that I need to explore with a little bit more. My only hesitation with this tool card is that it may not be as good as just a second copy of Bravery Charm, which is always something I'm trying to work into my Gardevoir list as of late, just to have higher immediate damage output with my Screamtails, with my Drifloon, those sorts of Pokemon. So actually making the commitment of a space to this tool is the thing that I'm debating on right now. And that's why the list in front of you is just an old faithful, really. There's no new tricks up here at all. But if you want to make that space for maybe the Gravity Stone or the Bravery Charm, you could cut the 2 Night Stretchers back to 1 extra Super Rod and then gain a space that way into the deck list. The main reason I'm going for Night Stretchers right now is the second place senior list at the World Championships was pretty high on Night Stretcher, so it's something that I've been weaving into my own 60. Lugia is also in the A tier and is equally unchanged as Gardevoir, so we're just going to get into a deck list. My personal preferences right now is a 2-2 line of the Chinchino, and I'm currently not playing the Weird Ear. I am just playing Raikou in the list, as well as the Earthen Vessel and the Lightning Energy that we saw Rahul play to a Night of Place finish at Worlds. Initially, I was kind of hesitant about this approach, but I expect Lugia to still be popular. I expect there to be a really good amount of Pidgeot in the format, with both Dragapult and Charizard being very popular presences right now, so having that extra bit of lightning in the deck list can really help you cash in and take easier gust prizes, and it really only means you need to get one Chinchino established for one big KO on a Charizard or on a Dragapult, then either Raikou or Iron Hands can KO that Pidgeot on the bench, and then you're looking to hunt down those final prize cards. It also means that when you're coming up against the E-Hammers or the Temple of Sinnohs, you do still have that basic lightning energy to still weave in amp you very much against the opponent if they're trying to simply ignore the Iron Hands once the energy is removed. Shifting down to the B tier, we have the Turbo Roaring Moon. Once again, gains no real cards from this set, so we'll get straight onto the list, and it feels like the only real tweaks going on right now is that people are incorporating Ancient Boost Energy Capsule into their builds to try and tank up their Roaring Moon a little bit more, can protect you a little bit against things like Dragapult Sprinkle, and there are so many 2-prize racing archetypes that having that extra buff of hit points on your Roaring Moon EX can be a real headache for them. This deck still has brutal consistency, aggression, and that early game disruption with the 2 copies of Judge in the list, still asks a lot of questions of opponents, and still feels like a pretty powerful play. Moving on to Snorlax then, and I also wanted to take the opportunity to talk about potential Pidgeot control changes, and I think that's the archetype that possibly gains the most, because as we know, the Pidgeot archetypes actually has a license to play more benched Pokemon and get kind of tricksy with it, and there are some great colours cards that come into this expansion. As we know, Fan Rotom can be fantastic at getting not only that Noctowl line, but also could establish multiple Pidgey on that first turn in the game, so Fancore could be a great consistency option just to establish that early quick search. If you were to have the Noctowl, there's always going to be the Cornerstone Ogerpon making its way into Pidgeot control, but you could even consider Terapagos. As we know, Double Turbo Energy is a big card that we see in Pidgeot all the time, and Terapagos could actually pressurize with its attack. And if you want to go down a prize-taking control deck with Terapagos and potentially Blood Moon Ursaluna, having the Curly Wall from Bouffalant would buff both of those Pokemon up substantially and allow you to have that sort of penny cycle with that Pidgeot so nicely. So it actually could be a pretty devastating combo to have an entirely colourless package here and go down a controlling route. Some more minor tweaks is that we get a Mo Rotom, which can be a new way to remove lots of special energy cards. And as we know, we've always suffered against the Lugia matchups as these controlling decks. So if you are going to have energy to attack, you can have Mo Rotom in here. You probably still need to play Temple of Sinnoh and Giacomo into the deck as well if you really want to respect the Lugia matchup. But this can be another great way to remove lots of energy at once. And I've talked about this tool a lot actually, but the Gravity Gemstone could also be useful in either Snorlax archetypes or Pidgeot builds. Both are quite high on the Arven counts, and there can be situations where you can put this tool onto things that aren't Snorlax, of course, and just again allow your counter catchers to just be more powerful, force more out of the opponent, allow things like Crushing Hammer to be more devastating cards in the deck lists because your opponent simply can't attach retreat out of certain Pokemon. So it could just be another card that you can use to gain free turns. In the City League, Snorlax has done a little bit better, so I am just going to be showcasing that deck list right now. Not too many thrills within the 60, no new cards either, but the same old with the Mimikyus and Ogerpons in the list, as well as that heavy handheld fan count, which is becoming more and more popular. So Palkia VSTAR is trying to make that triumphant comeback in this new expansion with so many supporting cards at its disposal. As we know, that Subspace Swell gets so much more dangerous with Area 0 Underdepths now, where you can have 8 bench Pokemon on your side of the field. You can quite easily incorporate Terapagos EX, another Pokemon that benefits from a wide bench, or have the Wellspring Ogerpon in your deck as well. You can also get even more creative with things like Cornerstone Ogerpon as well in the deck list if you really want to, but essentially just having more buff to Subspace Swell is a huge selling point here, and Noctowl can also weave in quite nicely to the 60. We know that cherry picking some key item cards for combos, for example Prime Catcher Cancelling Cologne, can be devastating with a turn 2 Radiant Greninja play, and Noctowl can also just be used to piece together all sorts of other combo cards just to make sure the deck is ticking over nicely. So this new engine overhaul is something that Palkia really loves to see. Terapagos naturally fits into the deck list simply because you want to go wide, but also it's a card that you can accelerate to via Glass Trumpet, and this archetype can be a little bit shy on attachments. You have that one burst of energy acceleration from Star Portal, but from there you're just manually attaching throughout the remainder of the game. So having a Glass Trumpet and Terapagos combination in your list gives you another bit of burst to make sure you're not whiffing on attacks. And once again, the Briar Supporter is powerful enough to always consider, and if you're already going to be playing Noctowl and Terra Pokemon, as long as those Terras can attack, for example Terapagos, you could layer in another hurdle for the opponent in that if they ever go down to 2 prize cards, the Terapagos can close out the game, especially with a nice gusting effect like Prime Catcher or Counter Catcher. Palkia is actually one of the archetypes I put the most time into, and this is a list that I'm fairly confident with right now. It's pretty streamlined, it's what it's trying to do, but it still has some power spike cards in the deck. Like I said, the Cancelling Clone, the Glass Trumpet's a card that I enjoy, and I'm also playing the Kieran to give us extra push damage into the tankier matchups. There have been a number of lists of Palkia that use Glass Trumpet and actually Grass Energy plus Iron Leaves in the list as well, and we'll touch on that when we talk in more detail about Terapagos at the end of the tier list. Next up, we have Regidrago VSTAR. It feels like it's fallen quite substantially for a deck that hasn't lost anything, simply because it doesn't gain anything. It could just be that it's the first week of new tournaments and people are kind of bored of Regidrago. They know where it's at, they know how powerful it is, they don't need to try it out in tournaments, and it could eventually sort of creep back up that tier list, and that's kind of what I expect, because there's still nothing wrong with Regidrago specifically, but it could also be testament to just how much more ruthless the Raging Bolt is in the format right now, and how awkward of a matchup that can be for Regidrago. Because we gain no new cards, all I'm showing is the list that I'm currently sitting on with Regidrago. There are 4 lists that made top 8 at the World Championships, so take your pick of your favourite of those. At the moment, I'm enjoying the double Super Rod 0 Superior Energy Retrieval list, but I've also made the space for the Goodra as another attacking option. Next up we have Miraidon, and I think the Area 0 Underdepths is actually kind of underrated in Miraidon and how useful it can be. We do have a tandem unit searchable Terra Pokemon in Mewtwo EX, even though its attacks do nothing for us because it attacks with Psychic Energy. This can be used for you to have just additional bench spaces. That can make your Raikou V a much more dangerous attacker, even if the opponent is trying to play around with a low bench size. But it also just allows Miraidon to have more license to use its Mew EX, its Pheasantipity EX, its Luminion V. All of these engine Pokemon that is littered in Miraidon can be immediately flooded onto the board so that you can utilize these abilities turn by turn. It also means that you can just tandem unit out a bunch of things at once, thinning your deck of Pokemon and overall improving your percentages with your electric generators. The other combination that I'm a little bit intrigued in is incorporating Raichu V back into the deck list because we have the Glass Trumpet item card. There aren't a huge amount of colourless Pokemon in Miraidon, but there can be double Squawkabilly, Blood Moon Ursaluna, and you could find reason to have additional colourless Pokemon within the deck so that you could Glass Trumpet to those Pokemon and get a massive dynamic spark play from Raichu. The list I'm demonstrating is very similar to Jesse Parker's World 60, however it has made the space for the Mewtwo and the Area 0 Underdepths. We have slightly reduced the energy count, but because the Lightning Rondo is a slightly cheaper attack cost, we are given a bit more license to be able to do so, because we don't need our generators to constantly be hitting 2 lightning. And finally, I do just want to touch on Terapagos EX. It's surprising to me that it hasn't made a dent into that top 10 just yet. I do think there's a lot of pedigree around this card, a lot of internal consistency thanks to the fan Rotom, and there's versatility in how this archetype can be played. The first list I want to show you is a double Turbo Energy base build that has the Dusknoir package in there. This list has the goal of trying to force that Briar play with the Counter Catcher and Prime Catcher within the 60, and the Dusk package to try and force your opponent down to a certain prize map, with Pidgeot EX trying to stitch it all together. Oftentimes you use the Noctowl to springboard you into that Pidgeot with cards like Featherball and Rare Candy, and from there you have Quick Search online to guarantee some powerful turns. I have also experimented with a no Dusknoir, no Pidgeot build, which is just focused on Bibarel and Squovit. The main selling point of a less combo-y build of Terapagos would be that you have less 2 prizes on the board and can lean more heavily into a penny loop, similar to old builds of Arceus Inteleon. The final list I wanted to touch on is a really fun one that I've been exploring. It's a Glass Trumpet heavy build of Terapagos that has Palkia VSTAR in the deck, so you do have those aggressive Star Portal plays with Cancelling Clone and Prime Catcher still in the 60 to be very strong when you go first and have a turn 2 Radiant Greninja play into the evolving decks, whilst also having a pretty stable attacker in the list as well with Subspace Swell. But you also gain the Iron Leaves as an attacking presence into the Charizard matchup, which is something the pure Palkia list struggles against. And we've also made the spaces for the 2 Lightning Energy in the deck as well, so we can utilise the Crown Opal attack on Terapagos and be a real headache for decks like Miraidon and Raging Bolt. It's still early days, but we haven't seen much success of a Trumpet build of Terapagos, so I would love to hear your thoughts on the archetype. Something like this is what I envision the strongest list is going to look like, where we boast a number of flexible attacking threats and type coverages. But of course, trying to juggle so much into one archetype can clutter it up a little bit, and there'll definitely be situations with a list like this where things don't quite come together and you're trying to juggle too many balls at once. Let me know your thoughts on the current top 10 and where you think Terapagos could end up, if it's going to fall shy of the mark or if it has the potential to shake up the metagame and push itself into those higher tiers. I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.